Good evening, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest opposition preview show here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, before I do welcome on my very special guest, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. Find out what they can do for you. Visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, my special guest today is a bit of a regular on this show now. She has been on twice beforehand, and she is a Brentford fan. She's also been the face of Sky Sports News and, of course, TalkSport. It is a pleasure to welcome back onto Up the Cherries in all departments, Natalie Sawyer. Evening, Natalie. How are you?
I'm very well, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. And thank you for returning to the show. So, of course, you're still on TalkSport alongside Jim White as well. How's it all going?
Oh yeah, all very well, thank you. Early starts now, so the alarm goes off at 3:30 of a Saturday and Sunday, which isn't pleasant. But do you know,
Yeah,
once you're up and you're away, so it's fine. And I love it. I really love it. I'm very privileged to do the job that I do because it's just fun at the end of the day.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, let's start off with England and, of course, being relegated from our group, from the Nations League. Some people think that it's a pointless competition, but at the same time, I guess it gives us the opportunity to play better teams. But
Mhm.
one Brentford player was actually called up into the squad and was expected to get some minutes, and he didn't.
Mm,
And that was
mm.
Ivan Toney. Go on, give us your thoughts.
Oh dear. You go back to that day that he was named in the squad, and rightfully from a Brentford perspective, there's mass hysteria because we haven't had a player in the England squad since the 1930s. So, it's been a while. And, we do have a squad of internationals. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it's the first ever international, but it's just the fact that it's an English player being called
Mm,
up to England. It's just a big deal for us.
yeah,
So yeah, he gets called up. Everyone's so excited. You likewise, I think you see it in the press. They're all delighted by this call up, thoroughly deserved. And he does all his press conferences like they always do when a new player's called up, and then like you say, doesn't play, and you just think, what has gone on there for me? And yes, we've ended the campaign well, which has been a terrible Nations League, like you pointed out, but we've ended it on a bit of a high by scoring 3 goals against Germany, etc., etc. But I just think it's negligent on Gareth Southgate's part to not have played him, to given him that false hope for a start. And listen, I don't know what the conversations are behind the scenes. So maybe he's always said to him, you're not going to actually play, but I just wanted to bring you into the fold. But I just think we know what Harry Kane does in the team. We don't know what Ivan Toney does in an England team. Why would you not play him? Why would you not play Tammy Abraham? All these other players that, in
mhm.
case something happens to Harry Kane, we haven't seen these guys properly in an England shirt either ever or for a while. So I just think, yeah, for me, it's a slight negligence on the part of Gareth Southgate, but we have to just move on, really, sadly.
I just think it's crazy because at the end of the day, like you say, if Harry Kane was to get an injury, Ivan Toney, we know what he can do in the Premier League now. He's
Mm,
done it for one season. He's showing it again this season. And Therefore, I'm sure that he'll be absolutely fine given his chance, but he's getting that chance.
Yeah.
Who else would you say, is in the reckoning for that up front position if Harry Kane gets an injury?
Well, I do think Tony's a very similar Harry Kane-esque player. And I'm not saying he is like Harry Kane, but he's similar, the sort of roles that they have played for their respective clubs, because we can see that Harry Kane can occasionally drop deeper, like he's done for England at times as well. Tony does that for Brentford. So it's quite similar in the sort of style of play that they both have. But obviously, if you're looking, I think by the fact he's not played Abraham, he's not played Tony, just opens the door for everybody else who had thought maybe that was their last chance of maybe getting into the England squad. And of course, there's still plenty of games to be played in between now and Qatar, and someone will play themselves into form possibly. But I just think, you've got Ollie Watkins there, who's been in the England squad before. There's I'm Patrick Bamford, but he has injury issues, as does Callum Wilson. But I know Callum Wilson's backing himself to get on that plane to Qatar if he has a good couple of months. Now, the only issue with Callum Wilson is his injuries. But I just feel as though, personally, I've been let down because I really, really would love to have seen a Brentford player play for England. I just think it was a real, real wasted opportunity. But actually, if I go back to June and those 4 Nations League matches, that's actually when I would have called in Ivan Toney, because then for me, they would have been the 4 games you do try out different people, because maybe fast forward to these last 2, you think maybe these are the 2 games you're sort of focusing on who your first 11 might be when we take on Iran. But, I just think there's been a bit, I don't think Gareth Southgate's quite done the right thing when it's come to England and some of these players, but hey ho.
Do you think his time as England manager could well be up?
I still, as much as I'm questioning his decisions, and I do question some of his call-ups as well, and it's well documented, some of those players that a lot of people have questioned because they're not playing for their clubs yet, they're playing for England. I still think he has enough credit in the bank, so he deserves this opportunity to take England into this World Cup. And if he has a decent World Cup, which would mean going deep and probably has to match, if not better, what he achieved at Russia. If we don't get out of the group, then I'm afraid I can't see him lasting, because this is a good crop of players. And the last sort of few games that we've seen for England, we've just been so underwhelming. And these are players that you see who play for their clubs more often than not, doing brilliantly well. There's some of the expressiveness that you see from these players for their clubs we're not quite seeing for England at the moment. So there's a lot of work for Gareth Southgate to do. The problem is there's not a lot of time now, because there's no other friendlies or matches before we kick off in November.
To be honest, from my, the way I look at it is that, he's done very, very well, both in Russia and at Euro 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the big games, so that Croatia game, we went 1-0 up, they come back, and really, I think he ran out of ideas, after that. About half time, it just seemed to be all Croatia. Against Italy, we went 1-0 up again in, I think it was the 3rd minute, wasn't it? Or something like that. Yeah. And I think that's always dangerous, because he did exactly what, the Italians wanted him to, which was just sit right back and just allow them to apply the pressure. Whereas if he had gone after that second goal, I don't think Italy could have come back into that.
No, I think you're right. Absolutely, Craig. I think you can question his tactics, and you can question his in-game management as well. And sometimes I think he's reactive rather than proactive. Like you mentioned in those 2 games, you want to go for the win. Let's not sit back. Let's not invite them on. Let's not invite the pressure. Let's go for it. Let's go for the win. But it hasn't quite worked out in those two matches. But like I say, I still think he's at a bit of credit, because wow, what those two tournaments were wonderful in terms of what it brought for the country, and it brought everyone together, and that sort of celebration feeling that we had for so very, very long. So he's earned that. He's earned the right, I think, to take us to Qatar. It's just he needs now to put in a great performance as manager to ensure that he keeps hold of his job. Let's not forget he has signed a new deal not that long ago. I think takes him through to, was it 2024? Is it, or is it a bit longer?
So, yeah.
So, he's still got enough time in his contract FA wise, but if we don't get out of the group, then that will be an absolute catastrophe for England.
Yeah, completely agree. If, say, for example, the FA did choose to replace him, should they go for?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I've seen a lot of, I've actually seen some of the bookmakers and who they've gone for, and Eddie Howe seemed to be the favourite with a few of them. And I'm just not sure Eddie Howe really is already ready to leave Newcastle. I think he sees that as a project. Likewise, I think I saw Graham Potter also quite high up on the list. Again, I'm thinking this is another guy who's quite probably happy in club management right now. It's a bit early to move into international football. So I don't, you know what? I don't actually know. I haven't a clue. Even people talking more recently that maybe Southgate should go before this World Cup. And I'm thinking, but then who do you bring in? I can't think of many managers who of the kind of quality that you'd want that are available, really. So I just don't know. I'm a little bit bemused by as to who would come in, unless you're going to go, I don't know, and look for an Arsene Wenger or someone like that. But honestly, I think it's a really difficult answer to your question, because I don't know who's available and who would really want to leave the role that they're in currently.
To be honest, this was the argument we had about Eddie Howe. I think if the England job does come up, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I think Eddie might take it. But then again, he's on such a good contract. He has got a project at Newcastle.
That's it. That's my issue, really. I think all of these sort of managers that have been listed high on the betting are all in jobs right now, and most of them are pretty secure, I'd have thought. So I don't know. But you're right. Maybe I'm wrong and not thinking it from the sort of temptation point of view of managing your country and everything like that. But I don't know. There's also a part of me that thinks, yes, you're right. It doesn't come around very often. But someone like an Eddie Howe, he's still got a good few years of club management before international football comes calling. So I wouldn't be surprised if he would gain another opportunity. So I did see Sean Dyche. That was another name I saw actually listed. You can imagine actually Sean Dyche would probably bring a bit of success to England. And maybe it'd be quite nice to see him work with players that of a different level, maybe, let's say, to the ones that he was used to at Burnley. Not to be disrespectful to those players, but it was just kind of a standard of football that they played. But equally, I just don't know. I don't know who could come in, and it's the $64 question. So yeah, I don't know.
I guess managing England's very lonely as well, isn't it? Where you've got games broken up and you're going around the country watching Premier League matches, whereas a manager like Howe, like Potter, are used to that day in, day out role.
Yeah, and I mean, you might look at it both ways, really. Moving from being a club manager to the international stage might actually be quite nice, because it's not as intense. You're not actually working as solidly as you would do as a club manager, like you pointed out. But then, like you also say, it could become a bit boring. You're not actually doing as much. And really, when you do get to work with your players, you're not working with them for as long as perhaps you really, really would want. And then you've got all the politics of the club's not happy that you've called certain players up, perhaps. Like even I didn't understand why Jordan Henderson was called up into the England squad recently after the injuries to Calvin Phillips, because, again, we know what Jordan Henderson does. Why would you call him up? Call somebody else up. Give someone else a chance. But then, I say that now, and they would have called that person up and they probably wouldn't have played. So what do I know? But yeah, anyway, yeah, I don't envy Gareth Southgate at all, because I'm sure it's a very difficult job, and the pressure that's put upon him. Yeah, I'm already doing it. Everyone's doing it already. It's inevitable, sadly. So I can only just hope that he can ride this storm and get it right when it comes to Qatar, and we have a great World Cup to look forward to.
Well, one player that did give us a little bit of a scare at Euro 2020 was a certain Mikkel Damsgaard, who Brentford signed from Sampdoria. How's he settled in?
It's a bit of a slow burner, this one. Although he did come on against Arsenal and didn't do too badly, despite the fact that we were absolutely awful. And I mean, I I say awful. Maybe I should really give credit to Arsenal because they were just superior. I mean, they were absolutely brilliant. Yeah, he's been a bit of a slow burner, but I saw him. He's been playing for Denmark and has done all right in these last couple of games for their international break. So, yeah, again, I don't think we're yet to see the Mikkel Damsgaard that you're referring to, but I'm sure it'll come because it's just about getting adjusted to life in the Premier League, I'm sure, and getting up to speed with his fitness and everything. So, yeah. He's all right, but not quite the finished article as of yet at Brentford.
And of course, you also signed Aaron Hickey from Bologna and Keane Lewis Potter from Hull City. How have they both got on?
Brilliantly, actually. Really, really good. I mean, Aaron Hickey, in fact, both of them have shown no fear at all of playing in the Premier League. Obviously, like you mentioned, Aaron Hickey was out in Italy and Keane Lewis Potter from Hull. So to make the step up, you do sometimes think, can they make the step up and make it quickly? Both of them have just fitted in so easily. And they're both really young guys, let's not forget. And Hickey is playing as a left back, as our right back, I should say, but he's tends to be a left back, but does play at right back as well. And that's a spot that we were desperate to fill, I should say, all of last season, because we had Sergi Canos, bless him, playing as our right wing back. And he's like a winger stroke midfielder by trade. So defensively, it's not really in his nature. So I always felt a bit sorry for him kind of being employed in that wing back role, having to do everything down that right-hand side. Whereas Aaron Hickey, goodness me, I mean, if you saw the Brentford Man United game, a couple of his sort of challenges where he would sort of barge into Ronaldo or whoever it was like, I'm here, mate, and I'm not bothered about who you are. And it was brilliant. And likewise with Keane Lewis Potter, again, a really another influential player who, when he's not in the team, you sort of think, oh, we're missing Lewis Potter. So, yeah, both have done really well, actually, since their introduction to the team.
Of course, they are the big money signings, but you also signed Ben Mee from Burnley, which was a free transfer. And I already thought, as soon as you signed him, I thought that's a great piece of business from Thomas Frank. And it's proved to be, hasn't it?
Oh, do you know what? He's been brilliant. And I've seen, I wish I'd prepared myself. But he's been right up there with, I think is it interceptions or tackles or something like that. And stats wise, he's been right up there in the Premier League. He has been absolutely brilliant. And I mean, of course, you can't question his ability because he's been a Premier League player for such a very long time. But again, another one that has just slotted into that team, no problem. And as you can expect, is a leader out there on the pitch. Isn't our captain, but obviously is a leader, brings that experience and is just so cool, calm, collected. Some of the tackles he's made where you think, oh, another player would have got that totally wrong. They would have brought down the man and might have led to a penalty or whatever. But he has just timed everything to perfection. So, yeah, he has been absolutely brilliant. And like you say, just a great bit of business that I think most teams actually would have been delighted with a signing like Ben Mee. And he's just been great, really good.
Well, Thomas Frank did a very, very good job last season at Brentford, and also got a Danish superstar on board in the name of Christian Eriksen. Firstly, what was he like to watch at Brentford? And secondly, what were your feelings when he decided that he was going to part ways?
So the first question, different quality, just unbelievable. When you're thinking, is this going to be the Christian Eriksen that we remember?
Yeah.
And my goodness, it was. And now you're seeing it at Man United as well. He's a match winner, and he was for us many a time. And it wasn't just what he did on the pitch; it was just the massive lift it gave, I'm sure, to the players and to the coaching staff and to everyone at Brentford. Actually, to know one that Christian Eriksen was like, yeah, I'll come and play for you. This is a great opportunity for me to get back into football. And also the fact that I'm sure there would have been some Brentford players, again, like just walking around a little bit taller, thinking, oh, I'm playing with Christian Eriksen right now. This is pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, he was absolutely brilliant for us. The only shame is it was such a short-lived move for us, because we did want to sign him on a longer contract. I think the idea was, the sort of 6 months with a view to another year. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to sign that. And I say for whatever reason, we know what that reason was, because I'm pretty sure he knew I'm fine. I'm going to be all right, and I'll play myself into a new deal at perhaps another club, which is what happened with Man United. How do I feel about it now? And I'm more measured about it now, Craig, than when it first emerged that he wasn't going to sign for us. I was quite upset about it in a kind of angry way, because I felt, and look, I know there's no loyalty in football, really. There are only one or two that are quite exceptional. But I just felt like he might have thought, do you know what, I owe them a little bit more. And people will say, well, look, he did enough. He did what he was meant to do. He helped keep you up, etc. And that's right. He did. But I just felt like he might have had an emotional pull and might have wanted to stay on with us. But at the end of the day, I suppose if a club like Man United does come calling, it's very hard to resist them. And working with someone he'd already known in Erik ten Hag as well. I think in retrospect, I just wish he'd made his decision sooner, because I think it dragged on a bit too long for my liking anyway. But, we move on and we beat them 4-0. So that was quite nice.
Yeah.
Hi. You could have won type thing. But anyway, they're doing much better than us now, so I shouldn't really be too naughty about it.
Well, thank God he's okay.
Yeah,
And that was, the great thing to see him running out for Brentford. But the way I look at it is Brentford gave him his chance to come back. And where were Man United? And I know Spurs were mentioned as well at the time. Where were those clubs at that point when, he was trying to break back into football? Brentford gave him his chance. And
well, this is it. I mean, that's where I suppose when I do get a little bit annoyed by it, where I think, when I'm not as rational about it, perhaps, where I do sort of think, Man United weren't bothered about you when you were first trying to get back into the game. Now, whether that's because he didn't have a relationship or never's had a relationship with Ralph Rangnick, maybe that's partly why that didn't happen. But, that's kind of where, as a Brentford fan, and I think other Brentford fans might think, we were the ones that did the due diligence. We were the one that made sure we had everything in place that you could start kickstart your career again, if you like. And perhaps, I suppose, there's extra insurances that you have to have in place, etc. All of these things that are done especially for one player. And then you think, we've done all that, and now basically someone else is going to come in and reap the rewards of what we sort of started. But look, ultimately, like I say, I'm sure in most people's positions, if a big club comes calling, it's very hard to turn them down. And with the money that they offer, with the competitions that they're in, like I say, retrospectively now, I can kind of sit back and go, fair enough, But just at the time, it was quite raw. And I remember thinking, I was just gutted. I was just gutted that he didn't fall in love with us and want to stay with us. But, it's just one of those things.
Of course, Thomas Frank still at the helm at Brentford. And, he's done a fantastic job last season, as I mentioned earlier on. But what's the Thomas Frank that we remember in the Championship like to the Thomas Frank that has adapted to Premier League life?
Oh, good question. I think he might, and there'll probably be fans of Premier League clubs that will watch this and be screaming when I say this, but I think he's a bit more measured, maybe a little bit more, how can I say, not as emotional when it comes to some of his post-match reactions. Because there were a couple of times last season that he would say something that the opposition fans didn't like. And that's inevitable. A lot of managers do that. But, I think he hasn't. And look, it's still early days. There's still plenty of time for him to do that. Sure. But I just think he's maybe he's just toned it down a little bit. But in terms of, him as our manager, we all adore him. And actually, the annoying thing is the better we do and the better he does, that you have that inevitable fear that he might leave eventually. And I've had this discussion more recently because, as I say, we seem to be doing all right, and that worries me that other clubs are going to be looking at him. So that is echoed by so many other Brentford fans, because I don't know, maybe we won't realise what we had until it's gone, that kind of thing. because as much as he's brought success to us, it's more also about what he's done to bring everybody together, that kind of community feel that we all have, the love that we all have for him, the team, and we feel it's vice versa. And that really does come down to him. He's been so pivotal in all of that. He's the one that started this whole lap of honour. I mean, it was against Bournemouth in the playoffs that he sort of started this sort of that was a pre-match lap of honour thing to whip the crowd up. But he's just kind of, it's just, I don't know, he's just brought a real unity for us, and yeah, I'll be really, really sad if and when he decides to leave us, because I just think he's been excellent for us.
I guess he's not very popular with some Bournemouth fans, to be fair, because of course, he was tapping his watch throughout that.
Justifiably so. Asmir Begovic, awful, I must say. Oh, I was at that game, and I was getting frustrated, so I don't blame Thomas Frank really, but I can understand equally, of course, Bournemouth fan. Like if it was the other way around, I'd be like, yeah, don't like him. He's an annoying manager.
Of course, there is this horrible rumor that's going around at the moment that Leicester want Thomas Frank.
Yeah.
Could you see that potentially happening, or do you think Thomas Frank has got this project like we say about Eddie Howe and Graham Potter?
Well, I mean, he's been asked about it, and obviously what they say in front of a camera could be very different to the conversations they're having behind the scenes. But he has said it a few times, I'm very happy here. I don't see the need to leave. And in all fairness, right now, I don't think, Leicester fans will hate me for saying it, but I'm not sure Leicester is as attractive right now, just because of, one, the situation they're in, two, the financial situation as well that they're in. Now, Leicester fans might be shouting and saying, I have no idea, and maybe I don't, and maybe I'm getting it all wrong. But right now, I just think there's a little bit more security with Brentford than there is with Leicester. That being said, I'm sure that if Thomas Frank went, he'd make a real success of them, because we know there are still good quality players there. Some of them are a little aging, but majority, there's still a lot of good talent there to work with. And I'm pretty sure that if Thomas Frank went there, he would do a really good job. I just hope that he doesn't want to go there and still loves it. I know he loves Brentford. I know he feels like the warmth and love from everybody. And I think it would be a very difficult decision for him to leave, but I think he still likes the Brentford project still. I think there's a lot more for him to still achieve, and that's what he wants to do. But ultimately, money talks, and certain teams in certain levels may just be more attractive. So we shall see.
I can't see why you would want to go to a team at the bottom of the league.
No, I mean, the only thing I'd say is it's still early days. It's slightly different if you're talking January and they're nearly doomed, but there's still plenty of time for it to be turned around. So that's the only thing I could think, that he might think, well, actually, I'm more than capable of getting the best out of these players. But I don't know. There's a part of me that believes what he's saying, that he's happy at Brentford, but that could come and bite me on the bum.
Well, the season so far has been a bit of a mixed bag, really, hasn't it? So you mentioned there the Arsenal 3-0 defeat. You had the defeat against Fulham, which was topsy-turvy game.
Yeah.
But you've also had the great wins against Leeds 5-2. And who can forget that Manchester United win, which was amazing, really, wasn't it?
Oh, do you know what was lovely is we've got 4 season tickets, and there's 3 of us that normally go, my dad, my brother, and me, and then we always have a spare, and we either take my son or my nephew or somebody else along. And my dad actually wasn't around for this game; he was away, so I was able to bring somebody who I work with, who is a Brentford fan, but for health reasons hasn't actually been able to go to the new stadium. And so I invited her and her partner, and they both came. And for them to have made it to their first Brentford game and it be Man United, one in itself is quite exciting. That there are certain clubs that just have that prestige that you want to see, and Man United is one of those. And then for us to completely annihilate them, and it was breathless. It was breathtaking. It was unbelievable. It really was. And it was one of those, I just kept turning to him. We were like hugging and just being like, what is going on? It was just madness, but thoroughly deserved. And in a way, obviously led to Man United needing massive changes, and now they've kind of bounced back from it. But yeah, it was definitely the win. Probably will be up there for a very long time. It's probably not the best win ever for us in the Premier League, let's say, because I think you go back to last season and beating Chelsea 4-1 at Stamford Bridge will probably always top that, unless we can do something since going forward. But that will be probably our best home win in the Premier League for a very long time, I imagine.
Season so far, or do you think that there's a lot more that this team can give?
I think there's still more to come. I do. I think we're still gelling. We're still getting to grips with some of the new players, even though, like I say, I think they fitted in really well. I think we haven't even got necessarily our first choice defence, really. I mean, Ethan Pinnock has been out injured since the start of the season. Christopher Ayer is only just coming back. So there's real competition actually for the back line. And Christian Norgard likewise has been injured for a couple of games. He's a big miss, actually. And I'm not saying he'd have been the difference against Arsenal, because I just think Arsenal were fantastic. But I do think if he'd been in there, that we might have been a bit more competitive, just because he's so good at his interceptions and kicking off our attacks and stuff from that base of the midfield. So yeah, I think there's a bit more to come, certainly. We'll have dips, I'm sure, but I'd like to think we'll have more highs than lows.
Before we go on to predictions, we better discuss the last time we met, which, of course, was that playoff semi-final. So we won the first leg 1-0 at Dean Court, and we went 2-0 up on Accurate through Danjuma. Toney got a penalty, and then, of course, a former Brentford player, Chris Metham. It was, wasn't it Mbembo that he pulled down? Yeah. And then it all just changed, didn't it?
It really did. The momentum completely changed. And I mean, I mentioned before I was there, and I think there was 4,000, something like that, Brentford fans. And maybe there's been a few games since, but really that atmosphere, I don't think has really ever been beaten. I say that, I mean, there probably has, because now we've got full stadiums, but it felt like it was a full stadium. That's how much noise had been created by the Brentford fans that were there. And it was a crazy game. It really was. And when you raced for that, for you to have scored from our corner, that was what, wasn't it? And you felt like, God, this is game over. This is game over. And it felt like it was typical Brentford, game over so early on as well, But just to show that character and resilience, I thought was absolutely brilliant. There were reports of what happened afterwards, with Begovic kicking the wall and leaving a nice hole in the wall in the stadium. Allegedly, yes. Allegedly, I will say, but there are reports of that. That's how frustrated some of the Bournemouth players had got. And understandably so. Obviously, it's huge. Playoffs are frightening. I'm frightening as a fan. I'm sure they're frightening as a player, because they can turn so quickly. But yeah, it was dramatic, certainly. And we finally broke our playoff hoodoo, which was quite exciting to win at Wembley as we did. But yeah, it was some game. Absolutely right. It was some game.
And that final as well. You was there for that final.
Yeah, I was. And it's the first time actually I'd gone into a playoff final, and I've been to a fair few, where I did feel a little bit more confident. I'm still nervous, still kept thinking, this is Brentford. It often leads to heartbreak. But I felt more confident than I'd ever been going into a playoff final. And again, we took a very early lead. I think we were 2 up within 20, 25 minutes, maybe, something like that. Yeah. And yeah, I felt like we were very much in control of that game from start to finish, really. And it was just one of those occasions where Swansea didn't quite turn up, and we were just much better and just deserved that victory in the end. But it was a good few days of celebrating. I can say that for certain. It was pretty special, and special to be there with my dad and my brother and friends and stuff that we were with. So it was really good, really special.
Excellent stuff. Well, I guess one thing that we need to discuss is the predictions for the game. So what are you going for, Natalie?
Oh, it's a tough one because I just don't know what we're going to get with Bournemouth, other than you're going to get character, you're going to get resilience, you're going to get a team that doesn't know when it's beaten right now. I mean, it's quite astonishing what Gary O'Neill has done in the last few games for you. It just feels like there's a real sort of, what's the word, like you're unified. I don't know, maybe that's not fair because maybe you were already like that with Scott Parker, but I don't know, there just seems to be, you're sort of embracing who you are right now rather than being feared by who you are, that kind of underdog status that we would have had last season and still have it to an extent this time. And, you know, defensively, you've really tightened things up as well. So I think it's not going to be easy. I think it's going to be I mean, I've got to back Brentford, but I think it's good. If we're going to win, it's going to be a narrow win. I'm a little bit worried about Philip Billing because I just think he's just been fantastic for you the last couple of games, and he has this sort of free role, it seems, that he's got, and I think he's relishing that. So, yeah, I am going to have to go with a Brentford win, like I say, and I'm going to go with a 2-1 Bees win.
Do you know what? I'm going to go 2-1. But I'm going to go the other way.
Really?
Of course, yeah. What a surprise! But yeah, I think I'll go for 2-1. Just before you go, of course, Emi Marcondes is at the club.
Of course, I forgot about that factor.
Yeah, and what was he like at Brentford? And of course, even though he hasn't played much here, he's quite a fan favourite because he gets involved and seems to love the club.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he was like at Brentford. He was kind of in and out of the team. Even when he first came, he didn't really feature much. I think he even went back on loan, or back out on loan. Yeah, he's just one of those players, like you say, doesn't necessarily start every game or even play every game, but he just gets involved and gets into the team. And like you say, the fans do love him. We loved him at Brentford. I wanted him to stay on because he scored one of our goals in that playoff final against Swansea. And I sort of romantically thought, oh, well, he deserves a new contract just because he scored the goal. Yeah, and I remember when we won that final, and I was very fortunate to be invited to the party that they were holding, where we had the trophy there and the players and everyone were there as well. And there's footage out there on social media, I'm sure if you look it up, that he basically steals the trophy, runs out the stadium, and is running down the Brentford High Street, effectively. I think he even went into a pub or something with the trophy, you know, and the fans are loving it, obviously, because they're just all getting involved with it. And he's just one of those, I think, that when he's at a club, he just immerses himself, and that's why he becomes a fan's favourite. He doesn't necessarily have to play all the time, but and that's what you want, don't you? You want players that if they're not going to play, they're not going to mope, they're not going to sulk, they're still going to be a great character around the dressing room and everywhere, and I clearly think he is. So yeah, I forgot about the Marcondes factor. So he might well have that point to prove if he does have a part to play in this game. Hopefully we know how to play against him. We can nullify him. But there's more to Bournemouth's threats, I'm sure, than just Marcondes. So yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be a tight game. I really do, just because I think you guys have a lot of confidence in your team right now. You never know when you're beaten. So we've seen the last few games. And it doesn't matter if you're 1-0, 2-0 down, you still fight back. So I think that's what's fascinating about it, really.
With Marcondes, he just pops up with surprises, you know, when he's on the pitch. And, you know, he's a great sportsman. You know, he's always wearing his heart on his sleeve. And, you know, he's a full credit to any club that he goes to. But you know, the good thing is there is that confidence that had come back into the side, especially after Scott Parker and those silly comments. I was at that game, that 9-0 defeat. It was not fun.
No, I can imagine. Jeez.
But do you feel that Scott Parker should have been sacked after the comments that he made?
I think once you start commenting negatively around how the club is working, I think it's very difficult for you to hold on to your job, because basically you're criticizing your employees. Or employers. I wasn't surprised in the end. Initially, I was like, oh, we're so early in the season. Why has this happened? But then you start looking into it, and then you realise, I think it was very difficult. It was always walking on a tightrope after those comments. So if it wasn't then that he was sacked, he would have been sacked at some point, because there was clearly a division of some sort between him and the board and the owners, etc. So if he hadn't have been sacked then, he would have been at some point, because there would have been another defeat perhaps on the cards and more comments. And yeah, and you can't have that. You can't have a manager being so critical, because that just is going to trickle down into the players, and you're not going to have a harmonious dressing room, really. So, and that's where I think Gary O'Neill has just come in and probably he's wiped the slate clean and said, look, forget about what's been talked about before. This is a new start for us. Let's get us back into a better mood, a better atmosphere. And that's clearly what's happened, because look at the results. It's been brilliant for Gary O'Neill. I'm interested to know what's going to happen next. Do they stick with him, or do they bring in somebody else? Who knows?
The thing is I think Gary O'Neill deserves the job after what he's done so far and how low we were as a club, really,
Yeah.
after those comments. And the comments were aimed at the players as well. I
Yeah.
think, what he's done is he's just revitalized everybody, picked everybody up, and, has done a fantastic job. 5 points from 3 games, and there's no easy games in this division. The big factor, though, now is, of course, the takeover talks, which
Yes.
I think that is why he might not get the job, because, of course, the new owners might want to bring in their own person.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's why there's not been a decision made on Gary O'Neill as a full-time, manager. And maybe you're right. I mean, you could say he deserves it. The problem is you have that fear of sometimes it happens that the interim becomes the manager and it dives once again. Sadly, things just turn around form-wise, and it doesn't go to plan. So as things stand, why, in a way, why upset it? Why not just stick at it as it is? Because it's proving fruitful for Bournemouth. And you're right. I forgot that Scott Parker was dismissive about the players. And yes, maybe he would have liked more backing in the summer window. I'm sure most managers want more backing.
Yeah.
And I know that Bournemouth didn't spend a lot, but if you talk so negatively about the club in general, then your position is untenable, really, because you're not really singing to the same tune as everybody else. So yeah, I think Gary O'Neill has just come in, and like I said, he's embraced that underdog status that you have, which not the only one, and it's working. So stay with that and see what happens when if and when this takeover happens as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this show again, Natalie. It's always a pleasure. You're always welcome on whenever you want to. And
Thank you.
all the very, very best with Talksport and whatever else you do in the meantime.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I love coming on. It's nice to chat to you, and
Yeah,
best of luck for the rest of the season, but obviously not on
yeah,
Saturday.
no doubt we'll be able to do this later on in the season as well,
Absolutely.
for the first match. But yeah, thank you so much again, Natalie.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining me on this show. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here Up the Cherries in all departments. Please also do remember to watch our latest pre-interview. That was with Lee Bradbury. We also had quite a lot of information about our takeover. So we had Steve Linkowski from Urinating Tree who come on. He is a US sports journalist, was really, really interesting. And of course, we had Kieran Maguire, who does the price of football, and he went through all the financials of Bill Foley and this potential takeover. So do check those out. Do please remember to hit that subscribe, that like, that bell button, all that stuff as per normal. But until the next show, up the cherries, and I'll see you then. Thank you for joining us.